There's been talk about interdisciplinary programs in certain parts of the world for more than 40 years. Especially about 30 years ago, it was a point of active discussion in North America. But in the last 10 years, it has come back as something of some significance in terms of talk. But the question really is, how do we go beyond the talk? How do we walk the talk? And how do we operationalize high-quality interdisciplinary programs within taught programs at university level? And this is an area with which I'm engaged, and it's a pleasure to be here to share ideas and I hope insights into what has been something that we've been experiencing here in Mexico, in North America, and in Southeast Asia over the last 2 or 3 years, in universities which say, we want to go beyond the talk and we want to actually operationalize this. Now, there are tailwinds which are driving the talk about interdisciplinarity, that are driving the imperative forwards, and there are headwinds. There are headwinds which are pushing even the cleverest of plans, even the finest of ideas, off route, off track, and which try to provide sometimes multiple ways of blocking the actual operationalization of interdisciplinary programs. And I'd want to just mention a few of those. But before I do that, a couple of questions which do arise. This one from 2015 from the UK Higher Education Academy. Is interdisciplinarity the new zeitgeist for all levels of education? And the other one is higher education, interdisciplinarity, more about research than about teaching? These are two common refrains which we're seeing, which we're hearing in magazines, in journals, in discourse within university sectors in different places. There is something happening in education, in some systems, in some schools, in some universities, in some territories, municipalities. And that is, if Generation Z and Generation A are going to be fully prepared to enter into the kind of working life which is going to be open for them when they graduate from school or from university, they need to develop something called systems thinking. Systems thinking, the ability to look at an issue, a topic, a challenge from different perspectives. Now, what's happening in school level, even at primary level in some places, is that they are introducing forms of interdisciplinary projects as learning modules in order to start developing the opportunities for children to look at an issue, but to look at it through different perspectives. Because intellectually, this is seen as a cognitive imperative, if you like, for managing later in their lives the complexities of the future world. Some people would call systems thinking by other terms, but essentially we're talking about not just problem solving, but actually also forms of creativity and forms of alternative ways of thinking and of approaching issues. Finland, for example, has introduced a kind of sophisticated form of project-based learning to achieve this through all levels of education, called phenomenon-based learning. But other systems in the East, in the West, are also actively now looking at developing interdisciplinarity as a learning experience at school level. But the universities is where the discourse has been quite frequent, but the action to actually realize it has been less common. We know about the tailwinds. We know that people will claim that this is central to academic innovation. We know that people will claim that young people need to actually develop systems thinking for their future careers. And we know that it's a strategic imperative for the public sector to make sure it's not outpaced by the private sector in offering relevant degrees which combine knowledge acquisition with competence building. They know we can see many arguments as to why people advocate that interdisciplinarity is necessary for a world in which the challenges and the problems are coming faster and they require multidisciplinary thoughts in terms of solving problems and in terms of approaching issues. The tailwinds are constant and they're fairly strong. And one of the most important, I think, is if we run interdisciplinary projects at university level, it is to achieve something which is unlikely or not possible even within a single discipline. It is actually to marry two or more disciplines together to focus on a topic of significance, of importance, which could be addressed and developed by the students in terms of finding solutions in ways they would not normally do it in their own discipline, and to develop future readiness skills. So the tailwinds are strong, and as I say, they're not new. They've been around for a long time. But the headwinds are particularly interesting because there is a narrative, there's a negative narrative often voiced about interdisciplinarity. And one of those is that interdisciplinary studies are typically shallow, they are intellectually weak, and they often are, if you like, almost populist. They focus on something of topical excitement, and they're not to be taken seriously. They're not to be taken seriously. This is a very common refrain from traditionalists within certain subject areas at university level and in school. So that prevents the doors from opening on saying, but what if? What if we explored how to combine chemistry with physics to address this very specific problem, which cannot actually be successfully addressed by each alone, and at doctoral level or postdoctoral level is being researched through fusion. So if they are researching this issue through the fusion of those two subjects, why don't we start the understanding how to do it at an earlier level, i.e. in first degree and second degree level? Often another complaint is that, yeah, we had this project, yeah, it was a clever idea, yeah, it was very interesting, but the students didn't like it. Why? Well, we just taught it, we ran it the same way we run most of our projects. And in some universities, not yours I'm sure, but in some universities that means monologue as opposed to dialogue. It means lecture as opposed to learning, co-construction, etc. It means using traditional methods. So if you use passive learning techniques to address and to introduce an innovation, it will fail because the innovation will require active learning techniques. If the IDP project is to develop student agency, efficacy, self-confidence, motivation, then it needs suitable methodologies. And sometimes the professors are not the best equipped people in some parts of the world because they haven't had training in pedagogy, and that reduces the opportunities to develop the IDP. And another issue is the administrative structure is too rigid and the recognition processes don't really permit a change. Now, the most common mistake is to confuse interdisciplinary with multidisciplinary. And you can find discussion in journals, in forums, all over the place, where people will say, we're doing interdisciplinary courses, we're running interdisciplinary courses, we're developing interdisciplinarity in our university, but actually they're not. What they're developing is multidisciplinary opportunities to learn. Multidisciplinarity is additive. It's where the student of law, who's doing law as the main degree, also studies on the side a bit of psychology, a bit of sociology, I don't know, a bit of agriculture, whatever, where they add courses to their main course. Interdisciplinarity is integrative. It is very, very different. It is where those two disciplines or more come together and bring the different traditions together in order to create a learning experience or a research experience not necessarily easily developed within their own subject. And this confusion about terminology is actually within languages. So there's a lot of confusion within English. It's within faculties that will be defining this term in different ways in English, and it is the difference across different languages, Spanish, French, German, and so on. So there's a lot of confusion about what we're talking about, which is always the first thing to address when we need to work on trying to find if there's potential for developing IDP interdisciplinarity in a university. Now, some of the headwinds which we can see. One is that in some parts of the world, academics are tired. They're pressure fatigued. They are fed up with increasing change, with increasing pressures, they've become cynical in some ways about their position and about the administration and how it's handling them and their position and their colleagues. They are resistant to change because they have been subjected to so much change in the last 20 years. And unfortunately, in some universities, there has been a constant, if you like, tweaking, incremental change. Each year, new this. Each year, a different platform for feeding in your time hours, for feeding in the student grades. Each year, more miserable, if you like, baggage to handle. Now, that is not the case everywhere, I know, but in some of the universities which have been trying to break through with IDP, when you look at the academics, they are absolutely crucial, number one, for making this work. You have to recognize that they need to be recognized, they need to be heard, they need to be encouraged, and there needs to be a negotiation. This cannot come as a top-down directive to a head of department who then needs to make it a top-down directive to the academics that they choose to do this. This has to be grassroots, and it has to grow from beyond, because the academics are the key, absolute number one for this. And where we work, when we talk to the academics, they'll say, I have wanted to do IDP for a long time because it is the way forward, and it is providing a key thinking competence which is essential for educated people now and also in the future. Another headwind is that in some places, academics are not trained in methodologies. This is not the case, for example, in Northern Europe, perhaps also in parts of the UK, but it is the case pretty much globally, where academics are not trained in methodologies. And unfortunately, if you introduce an IDP project, it will require a shift of methodologies. The beauty of this is that it's coming at the same time as AI, and AI produces a lot of potential capacity for both students and teachers to change traditional teaching methods, and also to find tools to successfully embark on innovative learning experiences where the intended learning outcomes are very relevant and very specific, and where the students can see what those outcomes were. I'll come back to the students in a moment, but the academics also used to report that, if I'm a young academic, I have got to be thinking about publishing. The term, publish and perish, what was it, 1960s it started, and it's still with us, goodness knows why. But the pressure to publish is so high. Some academics say, I don't want to go down the road of IDP because the citation impact is only in these journals which are true to my discipline, and the IDP gives me no added value. Other headwinds include a lack of systemic lack of recognition and incentivization for academics. There needs to be changes in, for example, how teachers are evaluated by students. There need to be changes in how the organization recognizes the IDP. It needs to be in the ethos. And it can be quite easily, because it doesn't have to say, here at the University of X, IDP is our heart and soul, but it can fit into, here at the University of X, we are training young people to be confident, to be competent, and to be skilled in order to enter working life. And the IDP is a part of that, because actually when you look at the successful IDP projects at universities in undergraduate level, they don't take up a lot of time. They don't have to be extensive, but they need to be continuous and they need to be very finely tuned and hopefully implemented by fine academics. I mentioned earlier the students. The students can be a challenge. I don't know about you, but students are changing. They're changing very, very rapidly, for good or for worse. But credit hunting students, and I don't know where that term comes from, I have a feeling it might be Australia, credit hunting students are a challenge. Because if they look at the option to join a course, if they look at a course that is being imposed upon them and they don't see the immediate way of getting those credits, or they feel uncertain about, am I going to have to do something different which I won't succeed in doing, then I will avoid it. And they can be some of the strongest advocates against IDP, which is actually quite ironic. And then we move to organizational constraints, we move to faculty elitism, we move to a lack of a history of cooperation between faculty members who may be in campuses that are separated by distance, etc. We come to the sort of silo mentality of many universities, and there are gatekeepers which are organizational, which can block even the finest of ideas. When the IDP is recognized at the very top, and when it is introduced in a non-pressure way, then it can succeed very, very well. But their organizational constraints will exist, they do exist, and they have to be addressed. And the best way to address them actually is to go back to those academics, as we do, for example, in our projects in different universities here, and we say, okay, what do you need to happen? What should happen at the administrative level for this to work? And then finally, that is all tied to basically institutional recognition, and where it works very, very well. The headwinds are quite profound, but actually the headwinds are not just about IDP. The headwinds are about universities, especially public universities, being at a crossroads, being questioned, the value of universities being questioned on a scale we've never seen before in some countries, by parents, by students, and by politicians, and universities facing a critical, if you like, identity crisis and not being able to adjust fast enough to the working life competencies which are essential already now in some sectors and will certainly be essential within 5 years, within 10 years. So universities are at a crossroads. The conflict between the private sector and the public sector is very powerful in some countries, which is why the public sector has to be on top of advancing with change. And for those of us who work in the area, and for people like myself who are facilitating those processes in some places, I think I would say what I can see is that IDP is a catalyst for change. There are ways in which it can succeed very well. It does not have to be something which disrupts the curriculum, because it does not have to be time heavy, but it needs to be high quality. And I bring you a well-worn adage, forgive me for this, but when I was thinking of how to end this presentation, I came to this, which I haven't used for years, but if not this, then what? And if not now, then when? Thank you.